and a September slate that is highlighted by West Virginia. The Nittany Lions come in as a huge favorite in a game most people in America think they're going to dog walk the Mountaineers in. We're going to touch on that and preview the game on this episode of Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. Stick with us right after this word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive, where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you.
This is for Cameron.
What is up? Welcome in, guys. The duo is back. We've got a guest, a really special guest we're bringing on today. Somebody that I ran across on Twitter who has a very large following on there at Penn State _strong. But he wants to be known a little bit for his podcasting, which he's just starting up. It's a new venture. Everybody go follow him at 3B Pod PSU, which stands for Penn State University. A friend of the show now. His name is Alec. Welcome on, Alec.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. We're glad to have you. You're a Penn State nut. We love that. How is summer gone? How did the fall? How's it gone for Penn State, for Drew Aller?
Yeah.
Is he looking the part?
Yeah, so obviously AP poll preseason came out today, number 7. I think that's pretty much where a lot of people thought they would be, but just building the hype a little bit there more. Alar, for what I've heard, has had a pretty good camp so far. The big thing for him is it's new for him, but it's new for a lot of the receivers too. They lost their top 3 receiving targets from last year. Tight end Brenton Strange, 2nd-round pick. Parker Washington, leading receiver in terms of yards, another early round pick. And then Mitchell Tinsley, the Western Kentucky transfer, finished the year with the most receptions after Washington missed the last few games with a leg injury. So a lot of veteran experience gone. They did bring in Dante Cephas, Kent State transfer. Some of the stuff I heard, he's running with the 3s right now. I think that has more to do with him getting acclimated than, a talent thing or anything like that. Keandre Lambert-Smith, kind of the senior veteran guy they bring back at wide receiver. So there's a learning curve for everyone there on the offense, I think. I think they just would like to rely on that run game early and keep the pressure off Aller the first couple games, especially, West Virginia, Power 5 opponent is going to be tough for him. But then they get Delaware the week after, so I think they look at that as a game they can let them loose and, go from there. But I think, so far so good with them. The defense is where most of the hype has been. They had a lot of projected first-round picks, honestly, too, for next year in cornerback Kalen King and defensive end Chop Robinson, and then Abdul Carter, the sophomore linebacker. A lot of people are already looking at him as a possible first-rounder down the road. So most of the hype has been around the defense. I think that has to do with the fact they got Manny Diaz back for a second season. There was some speculation that maybe that wouldn't be the case, that with the season he had as a coordinator, he'd be right back in a head coaching position. But Franklin was able to hold on to him, and I think that is where a lot of the significant hype with the defense comes from, the fact that they have some continuity there now.
That was a great breakdown, man. Yeah, awesome breakdown. You actually – well, I think I'm done here because you just answered all my questions. See y'all later. I'm kidding. You literally answered like 3 of my questions. But thank you.
You got it.
No, I mean, it does segue right into what I want to talk about, and that's – it sounds like you guys are – and I'm not saying your offense is going to be bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I think, especially going into game 1, breaking in a new starting quarterback, not that he's going to be bad, but I'm sure there'll be some growing pains a little bit, especially in front of that 100,000-seat stadium, right, in game 1.
Right.
You guys are going to have to lean on that defense early on in the season, I would imagine, and rightfully so. I mean, you guys are absolutely stacked. I was just looking through my Field Steel magazine before we got on here. I mean, you guys have potential all-conference guys at every position of the defense, every level, multiple guys in some spots. I I mean, this is by far, in my opinion, going to be probably the best defense we're going to play this year. Paul, would you think that's a fair statement?
It's not close. There's not a close second.
Yeah,
I mean, you can look
that includes
you
Texas.
can look at Texas, maybe
Oklahoma. But we don't play Texas. But I was thinking we did
Right.
play Texas, but they're not on our
No.
schedule. Yeah, but that includes Texas Tech. That includes Oklahoma. That includes Oklahoma State, Pitt. So yeah, this by far is going to be the top defense we play the entire season, and it's and with you all leaning on the running game, I mean, Katron Allen is one of your backs there, and a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Singleton, right? Is that correct? And those, I mean, Singleton was he a freshman last year?
They were both true freshmen, yeah.
And one they ran for what, a combined 1,700 yards or something like that. So
yeah, they both had over 1,000 scrimmage yards actually, which was the first time Penn State ever had two running backs do that in the same season, and they were true freshmen and did it, which makes it even more impressive. But yeah, I mean, Penn State had Saquon Barkley and Miles Sanders in the same backfield at one point, but that was more a 90-10 split. This is more a true 50-50. So in terms of duos, Penn State probably hasn't seen a duo like this since late 70s, probably early 80s, when they would go to multiple guys at a time. But yeah, this is a legit duo they have.
Yeah, and I mean, Singleton, the classic speed guy, Katron Allen, a classic battering ram.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, the running back matchup in this game is extremely underrated. C.J. Donaldson has a chance when it's all said and done, and I mean no disrespect to your guys, to be the best running back on the field come Saturday when we play. Obviously, that's a big statement. But I think he proved that last year as a true freshman and everything he did. He's an incredible talent that a lot of us are excited about. 6'2", 240 pounds, and runs that in that 4.5 range. So he can really do it all, and he's got wiggle, and nobody wants to tackle him. He's still learning the position. He was a tight end / wide receiver in high school. And so obviously he's still learning how not to get hit and hurt in the hole. And that's something I worry about with CJ is you really running back. There's so much attrition with it that you worry about the damage over the course of a season for somebody that doesn't know how not to take hits from bigger guys. So I think he learned a lot last year with that, and he actually got injured in his lower body because that's how people have to take a guy like him down. And so hopefully he can stay healthy throughout that. But I want to the way I wanted to do this was we're going to start from the defensive side for you guys, the offensive side for us.
Okay. We're
going to break down our offensive line versus your defensive line. I think it's the key matchup in the game. Obviously, West Virginia returns all 5 starters for the second season in a row. Zach Frazier could be the best center in the country. He's definitely a top 100 player going into the NFL draft. While Milam's probably going to be an NFL guy, Doug Nestor is an NFL guy. There's at least 3 NFL guys on this offensive line that's going to be coming out within the next 1 to 2 years, and that doesn't include guys that are a little bit younger than that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing about West Virginia that we believe as fans that underrates them.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's a lot more about a team than an offensive line. We understand that too. What are your impressions of the WVU offensive line, and how do you think they stack up with that just incredible defense, even though a little undersized for Penn State?
Yeah, I am a little familiar with half of your offensive line because Penn State, I think, finished second in the recruitments for both Milam and Nestor. So I do know those guys a little bit. 2 guys that would definitely start at Penn State, I feel like. So legit guys. This is a good group from what I've seen. The interesting thing for us, obviously, is the run game, how Penn State would do against an experienced offensive line, because last year, obviously, Michigan had a pretty experienced line too, and it wasn't pretty. But I think that game was a pretty good learning experience for the defensive players and Manny Diaz, because after that game, the 7 games they played after it, I have it, they only allowed 2.6 yards a rush after that Michigan debacle, where they averaged, I think, close to 8. So I think they grew up a little bit, which helped. Part of it was, I think, with college, how quarterback. Sacks counts towards rushing. Penn State was really getting after guys in the second half of the season. But Penn State did bulk up the defensive line a little bit from last year. There were 3 guys listed in the 285, 290 range. They're now over 300. Devon Ellis, Keziah Izzard, and Jordan Vandenberg. Those are kind of the 3 big bodies they're going to be throwing out there. And then Akeem Beeman, who was like a tweener, was playing some defensive end, was playing some defensive tackle on like rush downs, 3rd and longs. They bulked him up to 285 now, so I think he's solely inside. So that'll help. So I think they sealed that up a little bit. And the other big thing is, early in the season last year, Penn State had Curtis Jacobs playing the will linebacker spot because they lost Brandon Smith from the year before. And no one, I guess, knew that Abdul Carter was going to burst on the scene the way he did. So the problem is he plays the will too. So they had some difficulty with getting their 2 best linebackers on the field at the same time. This season now, Jacobs is back at the same, where he had a really good 2021. He wasn't as effective last year at the will. So now having those 2 guys in the spots they're comfortable with, I think is going to help against the run too. So that's another thing I'm looking for, an aspect there. You lose Nick Tarburton too, a guy didn't get a lot of credit, a defensive end. I don't even know. I think he had a sack or 2, but just a guy that was always in his gap, kept contained, and that helped the run game. So he is a significant loss that I don't think a lot of people look at, but I do think this is a really good test for Penn State, and it's going to be a good measuring stick because they go play another ground and pound team in Illinois 2 weeks later. So I think this is a game that a lot of Penn State fans are actually, we're watching this battle too. I'd say this is number 1 on our list too of things to look for.
Question about on your defense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any weaknesses at all on the defensive side of the football for Penn State?
Safety's young. The guys are talented, a bunch of former 4-star guys. But I mean, you lose Jair Brown, who absolute stud, like led the team in tackles, interceptions, and was 2nd in sacks, I think, which is crazy for a safety. So that's a significant loss. I think if those young guys come in and play well, it's not that big of an issue there. It's just about gaining experience. The talent is certainly there. Mm-hmm. Middle linebacker, they're not as athletic there as they are on the 2 outside spots. I guess that's a given for most teams, but it sounds like Kobe King, the twin brother of the star cornerback Kalen King, is coming along pretty well this camp. So Penn State had the same situation a couple of years ago where they couldn't find a good Mike linebacker. And then Ellis Brooks, an older guy who struggled, all of a sudden, I think it was year 4, it just clicked, and he was a very sound player for them. And they're kind of hoping that King in year 3 kind of has that similar jump. So those are kind of the 2 spots where you like the talent. It's just about, a little more experience, getting some reps under their belt in game, which, I mean, when Jair Brown was out there weren't a lot of other guys playing safety outside of Keaton Ellis, the redshirt senior. So that's kind of the one spot.
Yeah, and like you said, Manny Diaz runs an intricate 4-3 scheme. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they flip it into a 4-2-5, and that's not an easy scheme to run. So I think you look at it going into year 2, similar with any offense. And I think you hear it on offense more than defense, but year 2 for a defense is just as important as year 2 for an offense. And I think you see significant jumps from one to the other on both sides of the ball. So that's something to look out for. When you said Manny Diaz was in year 2, I thought he was year 3 for some reason. I would have honed in on that had I realized it was year 2, and they were good in year 1. So you look at the jump, there's going to be a jump. Now, does it happen in week 1? That's why a lot of us feel kind of good if we're going to pitch for an upset. Obviously, It's going to take a lot for West Virginia to win this game. So if you're pitching for an upset, obviously it happens in week 1 against a quarterback that's only thrown 4 career touchdown passes. And so there are elements to this that say where you can say, well, I can see it. Obviously, it being a Beaver Stadium is a big deal. So a couple of players I wanted to touch on real quick before we move on.
Sure.
Who's asked his next question? Fatorum Mulba is a guy you're probably familiar with. I talked to an offensive lineman at Penn State.
Chumba is.
That's him.
Yeah.
That's him.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's crazy that you put that together. But anyway, he told me that Malbo was possibly the stiffest in the run game on the roster. He just had no pass rushing element to his game. Can you corroborate that at all? Or
Yeah, that does seem accurate. We did not see a ton of him, but he was a space eater. I remember the little time he did get in, filling gaps in that. So yeah, that does, from what the little I saw, that does make sense. Yeah.
why wouldn't he play more on a Penn State team if he's such a space eater? Do you guys require more athletic defensive tackles?
Yeah, especially with Manny Diaz wanted it last year, and Brent Pry was kind of the same way, where they really wanted pass rush from the inside, and they kind of went with lighter guys just to get upfield a little better, I guess. PJ Mustipher started here 3 years. He was a 315 guy. I think he was pretty much the biggest defensive tackle we've seen at Penn State since Austin Johnson back in 2015 was up there like 320 in that range. So Penn State's always kind of liked a little smaller on the defensive tackle. I think of Anthony Zettel, another guy from the 2015 team. He was a converted defensive end who was on the lighter side, maybe 285, and he wreaked a lot of havoc from the inside. So that's kind of just always been something they've liked. I've noticed is smaller guys, and I think they're getting away from it now after what happened with Michigan last year. They have 2 4-stars committed right now, both 6'5", 290 plus already. So I think they're moving back in that direction from what they were. So yeah, a little change of the philosophy now, but it was usually smaller guys that can get to the quarterback we're playing more.
And lastly, Lance Dixon is a guy that's a 5-star guy, obviously. He struggled at the will linebacker spot for West Virginia last year, but we hear we heard it last offseason, we heard this offseason. He's got as much talent as anybody, and they feel like he's going to make an impact at the position he's at now, which is kind of like the spear. Are you surprised he hasn't made more of an impact?
I was a little surprised. I mean, he was a 5-star guy when Penn State got him. Seemed pretty rangy, athletic. I thought he'd fit in pretty well at the Sam position at Penn State. And I thought when he did go to West Virginia that he would kind of blossom a little more, because he was blocked by Curtis Jacobs here at the Sam, and then they had Brandon Smith at the will on the other side. So I thought if he did get an opportunity, he would break out a little more.
Yeah, we were surprised as well. But hopefully Coach Brown seems to think he's more suited for the position they have him at now, which is, like I said, the spear, kind of like a safety linebacker hybrid spot. So hopefully they think they can use his athleticism a little better there than he would have at the linebacker spot. But 2 things I want to throw out to you, Alec. That,
all right.
Just 2 little pieces of trivia here that might make Penn State fans a little nervous, but maybe not. I don't know. Number 1, this would be, and I just read this a few minutes ago, Paul. You'll find this interesting if you haven't heard it. West Virginia has beaten 2 top 10 teams on the road, or 2 top 10 teams, in the regular season in their history.
Okay.
Both of them were ranked number 9. So this West Virginia has an opportunity to beat a team, or let me back up and rephrase it. This would be potentially the highest rated victory in the regular season for West Virginia in the history of their program.
Wow.
If we win. So that's one thing that they'll probably have to play for. It could arguably be the biggest win in their program history as far as regular season goes. Number 2, when Neil Brown was at Troy, he went on the road at LSU, 20.5-point underdogs, and won. That's about the same range we are in this game. So just a couple things for Penn State fans to chew on there. Yeah. I'm trying to make you guys a little bit nervous. I don't know if it helps, but
I will say, I think, obviously, I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit. I know you guys watching some of your other videos, you have talked about it, but the whole uncertainty with Neil Brown and the way West Virginia has been disrespected in polls this preseason, I think that makes them more dangerous in this game than, let's say, if they were 8-4 last year and people are picking them, 7th in the Big 12. I think desperate teams are more likely to want to, pull out the trick plays, do everything they can, especially on the road against a team no one's giving them a shot against. So I do think that, a lot of people look at the record and, we've looked at some of the stats from last year and we're like, oh, it can't be, it shouldn't be that hard. But I do think that with Neil Brown having his back up against the wall, it makes him way more dangerous than if they were coming off and, above average to average season.
Yeah, and Garrett Green's extremely dangerous if he gets the start. He's a guy that can touch the 4-4s.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if he breaks a seam, he can house it. And so, really, I think it comes down to if West Virginia can run the ball, they'll be in the game, all 4
Mm-hmm.
quarters. Because we don't anticipate Penn State's offense to be clicking on all cylinders in week 1. Maybe they do, Obviously, most people think Aller. There are some projections that he wins the Heisman out there. I just read an article in the Athletic the other day that projected that very thing.
Yeah.
Almost did a video on it. So, I think you go like Josh Pate. He did your best case, worst case today. He said your worst case is 8-4, best case is 12-0, and made a legit, he made a pretty good argument for 12-0 and predicted 11-1 for you guys. So that's a playoff spot. And so that's what we're dealing with here. And that's why this would be such a huge landmark win. Now, could you guys be a Texas from a few years ago and have all this preseason hype and maybe be 8-4? Yeah, sure. It happens every year. But I don't see it, and so we'll have to see. Another matchup we're going to talk about, obviously, is the Penn State wide receiver room.
Yeah.
In my opinion, is one of the biggest question marks on that team outside of how is Aller going to play on the likes in week 1, even though he has played before. Never in such a game. This is probably the biggest game in his life, obviously. But the wide receiver room, you mentioned a guy that I think is probably taking a big leadership role. You said Cephas is running with the 3s. What is the expectation for the Penn State wide receiver room? And then Couz is going to talk about our back end and how they've kind of shaped up.
It's Lambert Smith, the senior. That
Lambert Smith.
People do get them mixed up because they came in the same recruiting class. They both started as true freshmen, so I do get that. Okay. He's been a very vocal guy from what I've heard coming out of camp and stuff, really taking on a leadership role, which with a young quarterback, I think it's really important that a receiver does do that. And then behind him, it's a mixed bag. There's about 6-7 guys that could realistically start. It's just how many of them are going to put it together. Trey Wallace, a third-year guy, like probably the most athletic receiver they have. A guy 6'2", was a huge basketball player, windmill dunks and all that kind of stuff. Just hasn't put it all together yet as a receiver. I think, they're thinking this might be the year for that. Obviously, Cephas, I don't think he's a team 3 guy. I think that he will eventually work his way up to at least team 2 by the time the season rolls around. So he's what I'm going to keep an eye on. Liam Clifford, the younger brother of Sean Clifford, the old quarterback, backup slot guy apparently this year behind Lambert Smith. Really sure-handed guy, not going to blow anyone away, but savvy player. Caden Saunders, another slot guy, former top 75 recruit. Didn't really play last year, but he's apparently added some weight, which is good because he was a smaller guy. So maybe they could get him out there. There's so many guys to go through. I mean, they got Donald Driver's son on this team playing receiver. So there's a bunch of guys that could step up. If I had a bank on guys, that would obviously be Lambert Smith, Wallace, and Cephas as the go-to 3 to really start the season. But the thing that when people ask about the receivers, and it's a big question mark, people are used to Penn State kind of having a go-to number 1.
Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, Jahan Dotson, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Sean Hamilton, all guys that went on to have NFL careers. I don't know if this team, I don't think they have a pure number 1 like those guys were. I don't know if they really need one, though, because you have 2 running backs you absolutely love, and then they added Trey Potts, the veteran transfer from Minnesota, who will play. And they realistically feel like they're 5 deep at tight end. Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren will get the bulk, but they love the guys behind them. So I think if they feel like their best players are the tight ends and the running backs, then they will put multiple of them on the field at the same time. And if it's just Lambert Smith and Cephas, or just one of the 2, or 2 of them, that they will rather go that route and put the guys they trust the most on the field. And that it does make the dynamic interesting. I think it'll make them harder to game plan for in a sense, but I do think that, this team isn't 2019 LSU or 2020 Bama with 1,000-yard receivers running all over the field. I think they're a little more of what Georgia did the last couple of years in terms of offense, relying on running backs and tight ends.
Makes sense. And I think you could see we could actually see some of that on the West Virginia side as well, because there's a big question mark on our tight end.
Yeah.
Our wide receiver room as well, because we lost most of our production. So there are some similarities there between the programs. But now to talk about the back end, West Virginia's back end secondary. I don't know how much you've kept up with it, but we did lose a few guys through graduation, through the portal. But we brought in some guys we think will be as good, if not better, than what we lost. And we've got 2 or 3 guys who kind of got thrown to the wolves last year a little bit that have shown a lot of improvement through fall camp. And Jacoby Spells, Andrew, who's a sophomore this year, Andrew Wilson-Lamp, who I think is a junior or maybe a redshirt junior. He's a former wide receiver. He's 6'2", 175, real lengthy. But he was new to the position, so it's taken him a couple of years to get his body ready to put on them weight, because he's a real tall and lanky guy. So, but they said he's been looking good. He's made a couple big plays lately in that scrimmage Saturday, I think. And a guy you may be familiar with from last season, Alec, is Beanie Bishop, who was a corner at Minnesota last year, actually.
Okay, yeah.
I think I think they played you guys.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
From what I've been told, he did pretty well against Penn State.
He played extremely well against Penn State.
May have been his best game. So we're excited about him. Coach Brown has been talking a lot about him in his press conferences. I think he's looked really well. Has been an alpha in the room. Has been a leader for that group. So that's kind of the 3 corners to keep an eye on. And then we've got, from a safety perspective, we've got Aubrey Burks, who's arguably one of the top safeties, I would say, in the country, definitely in the Big 12. He's one of Pro Football Focus's top returning safeties. I think he was number 2 in the country. So he's and they said he's been a ball hawk at practice, so he's a guy to be looking out for. And then you got Hershey McLaurin is another one he's a junior college transfer that this will be year 2 in the program for him. And we all know year 2 is usually when these JUCO guys make their jump. So we're excited about what he might be able to do in year 2 in the program. And then the one transfer that everybody's raving about is Anthony Wilson. He's a Georgia Southern transfer or Georgia State. I get those 2 mixed up, but nonetheless, he's a big guy. He's like 6'1", 6'2", 200 and I don't know what, Paul, 20 pounds, 215, 220, somewhere in there.
Between 210 and 220. Yeah, 100 tackles. He had 100+ tackles from the safety spot last year.
Yeah, and Coach Brown said he's been as advertised, so they're excited about him. So that's just to kind of give Penn State fans who might be listening a rundown of what our secondary will look like. Still a lot of question marks and still some guys who probably haven't played a whole lot of snaps, but we do think we have some talent there this year. We think more talent than last year, but, obviously the proof will be in the pudding, as they say.
Yeah, I was interested in the secondary, actually, because just from quick glance, what I looked at in stats, I mean, I saw that they only had 4 interceptions last year, which Jair Brown had 4, so that was crazy. So that was where I was like, if they improve there, it'll be interesting, because if not, Aller might be able to throw downfield early and maybe get a rhythm. So West Virginia being improved in the secondary, I think will be good for him to get some, go against some better talent than what West Virginia had last year, because just from a glance at the stats, it seemed to be the downfall of the defense.
Here's kind of what happened. Oh, sorry, Couz.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying it was bad. I can't stress how bad it was.
So here's kind of what happened. Our NIL collective / trust got set up right at the end of 19 in 20. And so come last year, it wasn't in the financial position, and the year before, especially the year before when we lost on our back end, we probably lost 2 All-Americans, I think, to transfers that we just couldn't afford to pay on what was a top 20 defense. And so coming into last year, 3 years in a row, coming into last year being year 4, we had a top 50 defense, and it had been the staple of our team.
Right.
Had we had any offensive production on the other side, we'd probably win 10 games 2 of those years, seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So last year, we don't know if it was an aberration or what, but we do know that we just couldn't afford to keep our best players. Now we're in a position where we can. Unfortunately, we brought in some transfers that I think they took a chance on. A guy like Montre Miller, who was really good, but at a lower level at Kent State. A guy like Keyshawn Cobb, who I'm extremely high on, out of Buffalo. He was a 60-ish tackle guy, 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, one of those kind of guys. He just filled up the stats. And is a guy I think is going to be sneaky good. He's backing up Aubrey Burks, but I'm told he'll play a lot this year. So I do think the back end is going to be the most improved unit on the entire team. That's my prediction for this year for this team. I don't know it gets us into the top 50, which is kind of like where you want to be.
Right.
If you can, especially in the Big 12, where it's kind of flipped from an offensive league to a more of a defensive league.
Notice
when you look like TCU, Kansas State,
right.
Baylor, all have top 50 defenses almost year in, year out now. So that leads me to, obviously, back to the defense on Penn State. Talk about those linebackers a little bit. We touched on the defensive line. Wanted to touch on the linebackers a little bit before we move on in the secondary.
Yeah, I think people love the defensive end duo of Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson, but the best duo on the defense is by far the 2 outside linebackers, Curtis Jacobs, Abdul Carter. Carter coming on as a true freshman last year and first in the team in sacks, I think, with 6.5, and then second on the team in tackles for loss with 10.5. And he got ejected in the first play of the second quarter of the Purdue game for an iffy targeting call. So I didn't see him then. And then they played a couple
as a true freshman.
Yeah. They played a couple. It was tough, but they played a couple lower level teams then, or I'm sorry, just one then the week after, and he didn't play that much either. And then he comes out against Auburn, just all over the field, tackles for loss, a sack. So that was kind of the coming out party for him. So he wears number 11. That is the big linebacker number at Penn State. LeVar Arrington, Micah Parsons, a bunch of guys.
That's a big statement.
Yeah, I don't know if he's the same level athlete as Parsons is, but in terms of being polished as a linebacker, a lot of people will tell you that where Parsons was as a freshman, Carter was ahead of him. Just made way more plays, was in the back, a little more disruptive, kind of knew the linebacker position more. And part of that was not Micah Parsons' fault. He was a defensive end in high school, and then Penn State threw him at linebacker. So there was a little more of a learning curve for him. But then when you saw what he did by his sophomore year, if Carter's already ahead of him from, the mindset part of the game, then that's huge. Jacobs might be the most underrated player on the team. I know we voted him for that on our podcast. A senior, so like a lot of people look at guys come back their senior year and they don't take it that seriously. Sometimes, you're not that good. But I know there was an article that came out from an anonymous NFL GM that he could be like a sleeper top 5 pick or something, or at least a first round pick. Might have been top 10. But he's a guy, athlete, but he's just kind of always been overshadowed by someone else at linebacker, whether it be Parsons, Brandon Smith, and now Carter. So he's just kind of been the guy quietly sitting there waiting. And now that he's back at the same position where he was way better in 2021 than he was last year at the Will, I'm expecting him to have another big year too. So it really comes down to the Mike position. They kind of have a platoon there with Kobe King and Tyler Elsdon. They're trying to figure that out. They do have a recruit who I think you guys might be a little familiar with, Tamir Robinson, a true freshman.
Oh, yeah. We followed him closely.
Yeah, he's apparently, I think, 3rd at Mike right now. So he's coming off an ACL injury, obviously. So probably going to ease him into it. But, he probably has the highest ceiling of those 3 guys. But I just don't know how much they're going to put him out there right away. So like the starters, Tony Rojas, another true freshman. He was the talk of spring camp. I saw him at the spring game. He was all over the field. Obviously, offense is a little vanilla, not taking it 100%, but he was all over the place. He's a guy they think will be a 2 right away as a true freshman. So overall, Penn State went into last year really concerned about the linebacker group. They had a former safety playing Sam. They didn't know anything about the Mikes, and now I think they feel like they're a legitimate 6-7 deep there. So it's Manny Diaz has totally flipped the switch there in less than a year.
Yeah, that that actually segues into my next question. First of all, before I get to that, there's going to be like a Kent State reunion in this game.
Yeah, I know.
There are going to be 3 former Kent State players: Monte Cephas, Montre Miller, and Jay Sean Polk, who's a receiver for us.
Yeah, they're like
a
AAA team. Yeah.
But my questions, you mentioned oh my God, I'm having a brain fart. Manny Diaz. You mentioned Manny Diaz. Is he? I was going to talk. I'm sure he's only been there. This is his second year, so I'm sure he hasn't recruited all these guys. Who's been recruiting most of these NFL caliber players? I mean, I'm sure there's multiple coaches, but who would you say your all's top recruiter is, and who's responsible for bringing in most of these guys?
Jawan Sider, the running backs coach, does most of Florida recruiting. So Cam Miller, a sophomore cornerback, I think he played a big role, and he played a big role in a couple of the true freshman defensive backs they just brought in King Mack and Elliott Washington, 2 Florida guys. So he actually, the running backs, he obviously is probably the best running back recruiter in the country, but he also works Florida no matter the position. So he's always in the top 10 in recruiter rankings at the end of the cycle. But
you're welcome.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, but
in all honesty, we've got a running backs coach we love too. So Chad Scott. So both of those guys are great running backs coaches. Arguably 2 of the top in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I had a feeling you would say Sider. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah. But then the 2 defensive backs coaches carry a lot of the weight. Anthony Poindexter, former Virginia star.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
Know him well.
Yeah, Terry Smith, who played at Penn State in the 90s, I believe.
Lefty.
Yeah, he does the corners. Poindexter does the safeties, and I mean, Poindexter's a little newer, but Terry Smith has been here since the start with Franklin, and Penn State's never had a first-round cornerback drafted, and Joey Porter Jr. was the 32nd pick of the draft this year, but it was the 2nd round, so it still technically continues. So just kind of the work he's done there, kind of facing that stigma, has been really great to see. Helping get Kalen King from Michigan, although Tim Banks, the former safeties coach before Poindexter, was a Detroit guy, so he played a big role in that too. So Franklin's just done a good job of finding guys that seem to be from regions where all the talent is all of a sudden. Like they rated Virginia in the 2023 cycle, and Poindexter being from Virginia and a newer coach on the staff just so happens, and I think they got 6 of the top 10 from Virginia that cycle. So they've seemed to luck into things where the guys he's brought on the staff have connections to states that all of a sudden have talent in a cycle. So it's kind of been helpful. Chop Robinson was a guy that transferred from Maryland. They were on him hard. They were going to Micah Parsons comps, trying to get him to come here. Went to Maryland for a year, ended up at Penn State though, so he wasn't really recruited. Penn State's gone through defensive line coaches. Actually, they have a first-year coach there now in Dion Barnes, who, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of killing it with the defensive tackle recruiting. So it's interesting because there has been a lot of overturn with the staff lately on defense just because of how good they've been. Other teams have been poaching these guys. So it is interesting because it really hasn't been one legit ace long-term outside of Terry Smith for the defense.
Very interesting. So obviously you just touched on the secondary. You said you haven't had a first-round pick in a while. Touch on those guys briefly, and then we're going to touch on wide receivers a little bit. I think we'll double team the wide receivers, Couz.
That'll work.
Yeah, so you got to start with Kalen King, obviously projected first-round pick. Got overshadowed a lot because when you play with Joey Porter Jr., that's going to happen. But, a lot of people like him. Johnny Dixon on the other side filled in when Joey Porter got his appendix out last year. He did a pretty nice job. And then the safeties, it's a mixed bag right now. You have Keenan Ellis, a veteran guy who's fifth-year guy, been pretty steady player. And then you have Jalen Reed, who's the cousin of the former Michigan State wide receiver, Jaden Reed, who's on the Packers now. And you have Key Wheatley and Kevin Winston, two Maryland guys. Wheatley's an interesting one because they started him as a corner his freshman year, and he didn't play. He redshirted, but he was the takeaway king in both the spring and the fall camp. And then they moved him to safety, and he has 2 picks and limited action last year. So I look for him to step up. Winston, everyone loves him too. So the secondary, they like the starting group. The backup corners are a little interesting. Daquan Hardy at the nickel's pretty solid, a 5th-year guy. But the backups there, it's younger guys. Cam Miller, a true sophomore. Elliott Washing, a true freshman. So those guys definitely do have some shoes to fill. But in terms of the top 2, I mean, Storm Duck transferred here in December from North Carolina, and then he was out of here after the blue and white game because Johnny Dixon was doing so good that he's like, I'm not going to start here. And he went to Louisville. And then I saw some cornerback rankings the other day, and Storm Duck was 7th. Kalen King was 2. So if Storm Duck's 7, I mean, Johnny Dixon's got to be somewhere up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like a solid group. Not the strength of the defense, but probably not going to be a weakness either.
No.
There are no weaknesses on that defense. Obviously, we talked about that. The wide receivers from West Virginia are interesting this year.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think Rodney Gallagher is a name you're familiar with.
Yep.
I think every school in America wanted him. We landed him. We got nervous when he visited you guys.
I do remember.
We really
that,
did. We were nervous, obviously, even though it was in.
Coach Brown was on the hot seat at that point in time.
Yeah, I think that's why he said he did it, like just in case. I'm pretty sure that was the reasoning. Yeah.
And he's really made some waves in camp. I think he's going to get some playing time this year as a true freshman.
Mm-hmm.
But it really starts with Devin Carter for us. He's the NC State transfer. He knows what good quarterbacking looks like out of Drew Leary.
Yep.
And I think he's going to be wide receiver number 1. But there's other guys that can step up as well. And it's really a mixed bag, kind of like how you talked about your DBs. I mean, we have guys that we think are going to be okay. Carter could be an 80 catch guy, or could be a 35 catch guy, and it's really hard to tell which one he's going to be. If he stays injury free, I think he's going to do well. We're probably not going to throw it as much as we have in the past either, so there's that as well. But I would say him and obviously Cole Taylor are probably the 2 most exciting players to talk about coming out of camp. Cole Taylor being the LSU transfer. He's a 6'7" tight end, 250 pounds, has really, really good hands. Probably in that 4.8-ish, 4.7-ish range if we're being generous. Not the speediest guy. He's not slow for that size. But he's more of a big target. Neil Brown calls him open by birth, which I thought that was pretty funny. He's definitely a red zone nightmare. And certainly if we get the running game going, could be extremely important to this team. Couz, who else? Oh, your microphone's off, bro.
Coach Brown had his presser today. They had a scrimmage this past Saturday night, and he Traylon Ray, another true freshman. He said Traylon Ray was the most valuable receiver, or had the best day of all the receivers during that scrimmage. So he's coming along. He's only been on campus for a month and a half, ballpark, because he didn't get there till late June, and he's already contributed. Yeah, he's going to be a contributor. Obviously, we've got EJ Horton, the speedy guy from Marshall, who transferred from Marshall. They said he looked good in camp too. So last year we really didn't have any guys that were that we didn't have that speed guy that we could give it to and just let him outrun everybody. We haven't had that for a while actually, and we think he can be that guy. And obviously we've got Jayshon Polk, but I think they got Polk more for a kick returner than they did a receiver. But he probably will play that slot position a little bit. Those are probably
pretty
the key
high
guys.
on him.
Yeah, those are probably the key guys. I mean, and we got another. A big slot receiver named Noah Massey, who's like 6'3", 230 or 225 or something. He's a big guy, but they've got him in the slot. He came from a small school I don't even know where he's from, honestly. Angelo State, but I don't know where that's
Angelo State. Yep.
I've
Never heard of
in
it.
I don't think I
California.
haven't heard of that. Yeah.
at. He played at Bowling Green, I think, for a year, didn't he,
Oh,
Paul,
okay.
or somewhere like
Yeah.
that for a year?
Yeah,
before he went to
something
Angelo
like
State.
that.
So he's a grad transfer, but that's really and then we've got, I can't forget Cortez Braham and Jeremiah Aaron as well. They're
Right. Those are probably your three starters: Cortez Braham, Jeremiah Aaron, and obviously Devin Carter.
Yeah.
Is what I've been hearing.
Yeah.
And then Jay Sean Polk is probably going to be a guy. Listen, I say this all the time. In 6 games last year, he caught 40 balls and caught 3 touchdowns. So that's really good production. And he's a kick returning specialist that just plays the slot. He also played there at the MAC. So I mean, you get these guys. It's insane, man. Another Kent State guy.
Yeah, I would say wide receiver was the one position with West Virginia. I really didn't know that much coming into this, or coming into the season overall. But because Caden Prather was a guy who Penn State recruited pretty hard, and then he went obviously to West Virginia, now off to Maryland, and then who's the other guy with the 2 last names?
Bryce Wheaton.
Yes, yeah. I knew about him. So when those 2 guys left, I was curious what that group looked like. Pretty much it was almost a Penn State crew. Obviously Devin Carter was committed to Penn State, and they were after Rodney Gallagher pretty hard. So a lot of interconnections here, especially on the offensive side there. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Virginia earlier. Actually, historically, Virginia's, you could say at points in time, top 5, recruiting football state.
Yeah.
Especially 20 years ago. Seems like they fell off for a little while.
Yeah.
They've always had great talent there. Couz, you got anything else?
The only thing I want to touch on is what's Penn State's NIL look like right now? And I know with West Virginia, that's been kind of a big, I guess it's a big conversation everywhere, but
they finally, I think, figured it out. They were way behind when NIL started, and someone started Success with Honor, which was for every athletic program. It wasn't just the football team, where you had to go on the page and then donate to which sport you wanted to donate to. So that was complicated. And then someone finally made a Penn State only one. That was led by a bunch of former players. Michael Motti was involved in that. And then I think finally they realized that people were getting confused between the two. So they merged them about a month and a half ago, I think, to Happy Valley United. And they had the open practice on Saturday. And a big reason why they did it was because they had a autograph signing thing beforehand. So I think they finally have figured it out. They had a big event down at the Jersey Shore too, where they did a huge meet and greet dinner. So I think they finally figured it out, but I will say they were definitely behind last year. And they were pretty lucky that the 2022 recruiting class wasn't involved in NIL in any way. It was right after those guys signed where it became a big thing, because obviously that class is leading the team right now. And I wonder if it would have looked a little different if all these other teams had NIL funds set up at the time, especially with Aller, Singleton, then Dennis Sutton, a 5-star defensive end who's second team right now. So I think they lucked out there, but I think kind of the way the recruiting class is right now in the top 10 and the events I've seen them doing on Twitter and the promotional stuff has been a lot better in the past couple months.
How have they been able to retain guys without a strong NIL up to this point?
Yeah, the good thing is what they were doing was pretty much on retention.
Gotcha.
Penn State's not throwing, bags at recruits, really. I think they have a pay structure sort of set up based on what year you are. And I don't know the exact numbers, but for example, if you were a freshman, it might be $20,000 a year. Then when you're a sophomore, it might go up to 30, and so on as you get older and stay in the program. So I know that was a thing. I also know, I think they had in a life insurance NIL too. And if a player got hurt, they would help with that. And I think that's a big reason why Olu Fashanu, the projected top 10 pick at left tackle, came back this year, because I think they gave him a good peace of mind on that kind of stuff. So they were focusing on the team first, which was good, which is why they didn't lose anyone. They reached out to some big name former alums who own construction businesses and I think a housing remodeling company. And those guys inked deals with the likes of Singleton, Carter, and Allen. So that was big to keep the young guys happy. So I think that's what they did, which was a good plan, but the overall structure was lacking up until about a month ago.
Okay. Interesting.
And obviously, I would be remiss not to touch on that Penn State offensive line, the West Virginia linebacker room.
Yeah.
We mentioned Lance Dixon, obviously, but that was it, really. So, real quick on the West Virginia linebacker room, it's really simple. Lee Koba is a guy that a lot of people think can be a first-team Big 12 player. He's really the leader of the defense. He's a guy that transferred in from Syracuse last year, really had to learn a pretty complicated defense on the fly. And then right out the gate, Kansas had basically an entire offseason to prepare for us. They played a Division II school or an FCS opponent in their game one, and they aired it out. And then game two, they played us in the version of Kansas that won, a lot of games last year for Kansas is the version that we saw. And it was nothing but running option, sprint option attack. And so I think that's really put a bad taste in a lot of our players' mouths, especially Lee Koba. He had a horrible showing that day.
Right.
But as the season went on, he really came on strong. Really, really played well. He's extreme. I mean, listen, he is. You know who you ever follow USC, Yoel Romero?
No.
That's how he's built.
Okay.
He's literally built like a god, a Greek god. He's huge. And obviously he's the middle linebacker. Our will linebacker is a position that's still up for debate. And so there's actually a battle going on right now. So it'll be interesting to see who wins that. I think the money right now for me, I hope Trey Lathan gets it, but surely Jairo Favris could win that job. He's got a hard name to say. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. And Couz, touch on the right linebacker spot if you don't care.
Yeah. About Lathan, I'm glad you mentioned him because Coach Brown talked him up a lot today in his press conference. Said today at practice he may have been the best player on the field today. And in Saturday's scrimmage, he also played really well. So he's getting better and better. And even though he's a young player, he came in with C.J. Donaldson. They were high school teammates. He's another player. He played running back in high school. Now they're moving him to linebacker. So he's learning a new position. And but he's coming along. He's really talented, and I think he has a chance to be really special. He just doesn't have a lot of experience yet. So potentially could be a position that Penn State exploits to us or tries to exploit for us on that game. But so we'll see. But I like Lee Koba in the middle. I think he's going to be a dog. He still led the team in tackles last year, even after some struggles. But most of his struggles were in pass protection and or pass coverage rather. He really struggled in pass coverage, but they said he's improved that. But I mean, that's really the two, really only two. Well, we've got the bandit bandit position, which is kind of a hybrid linebacker D end. We've got Jared Bartlett, a veteran there that's coming back this year, who really, honestly, has underperformed the first couple years of his career. But
he had 1 4-sack game.
Yeah, they say he's. Yeah, I mean, against Virginia Tech 2 years ago, he looked like he was going to be the best player in the country.
Jeez, and
he just hasn't been able to do that consistent. And one word with him, Neil Brown always harps on, is consistency. He's not being consistent. If they can get him to be consistent, he has a chance to be.
He's got a ton of talent. Yeah. Yep. So I guess we're going to finish this thing off with the offensive line, Penn State, which you mentioned the all-world left tackle. Go ahead and talk him up a little bit. And some of the preseason accolades he's getting are just ridiculous. He's on a bunch of different awards watch lists. Could be the best lineman in America. So,
yeah, I will say they're very happy he's back, and they're. I don't know if you want to say rewarding or what, but they are being extremely careful with him apparently in camp, and he didn't play in the blue and white game. And it's not because he's hurt or anything. It's just this guy came back when he really didn't have to, and we're not going to put him in a situation to possibly get hurt in, a practice when we already know he's one of the best in the country. So, and I think that's been valuable because they've been able to get Drew Shelton, who filled in for Fashanu when he had an injury at the end of last year and played pretty well, but he had to burn his red shirt. So he's been able to get a bunch of reps, which is good because having someone who's prepared behind him is truly important. But this probably is the best offensive line Franklin's had. And a big reason why is that it's the most experienced he's had. His center is a 6-year guy. His right tackle's a redshirt senior. His right guard's a redshirt senior. And then at left guard, you're either going to have a true junior or a JUCO redshirt junior. So a lot of experience there. And then I just mentioned Drew Shelton, but they actually have some depth there for once. Vega Yayone, I think that's how you say his last name, but he's a redshirt freshman guard. I think he's listed at 6'5", 350. They absolutely love him, but he's not going to start probably until next year. Yeah, he's a big dude, but so they like him as a reserve. And then true freshman 5-star Jevin Williams is apparently working to fight for the backup right tackle spot. So if they get him in that position right away, that would be great too. So yeah, the big thing is it's finally an experienced line. You have a projected top 10 pick, which Penn State hasn't had in the offensive line in a very long time. So just kind of getting some cohesion with this group because Fashanu missed time last year. Wallace, the right tackle, missed time last year. Norzed, the center, was a guard last year, and now is playing center because Juice Scruggs, I think it was a 3-year starter at center. No, 2.5, I believe. Starter at center is off to the NFL. So there's some moving around going on and some guys coming back from injuries. So that's the one part you worry about, but it's definitely the best we felt about this group probably since 2011, honestly.
Yeah.
Interesting, man.
We're in that same boat with ours. And Paul, I don't think we've touched on our defensive line yet, have we?
No,
I
we
don't
haven't.
think you did, no.
Real quick, if you want me to do it real quick?
We can just – no, there's no reason to hurry up. I mean, it's the last thing we're doing anyway.
Okay. I just wanted to – I got to give a shout out to my local boy here, Sean Martin. He's our defensive tackle.
Okay.
Or a defensive end, actually. We run a three-down line, so he's basically our defense. He's 6'5", 290, big, long guy. He's has a chance to be special because he has the physical tools to be. He just needs to be probably a little bit more consistent, I would say. We're going to be replacing 2 guys up there, though. We lost Jordan Jefferson to the transfer portal, who was our starting nose guard last year, and we lost Dante Steele, obviously, who was our star in the NFL. So replacing those guys will be tough. Coach Brown said we're basically doing it by committee. We're not going to have anybody as good as Dante Steele's, but we go 9 to 11 deep at that position. So he's going to be able to shuffle guys in and out, keep guys fresh.
Yeah. We've
got a transfer nose guard in Mike Lockhart, who they think will be pretty good from Georgia Tech. We have Edward Vestorinen will probably be the starting tackle. He's a foreign player out of Sweden, I believe, Paul. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure exactly where he's from. Sweden.
Okay.
But nonetheless, that's probably Martin, Vestorinen, and Lockhart will likely be our starters. But then we have a guy Paul loves, Day Hawkins, named Devon Hawkins, who's a transfer from Tennessee Tech, that started his career at Kentucky. Was it Kentucky? I think. They said he looked really good. Well, I know he did. I watched it. He looked really good in the spring game. Has a really high motor. They're high on him, and we actually have Sonny Redwood. We have some young guys up front that are playing backup roles that we're really high on. They just haven't gotten a lot of experience yet. So we're actually pretty. At least I am. I'm pretty confident in that group as a whole. I think they'll be a pretty good, solid unit for us. Paul, what do you think?
This is a defense where obviously the outside backers apply pressure and they dial up blitzes from the safety in the corners and whatnot. But my biggest issue with this line overall is that there's just no natural pass rushing talent, really. I mean, there are some guys who get sacks, Sean Martin being one of them. But there's nobody you can say put their hand in the dirt and you're worried about snap after snap. These are like you call gap fillers type players, which in this defense is actually what you want to free up the backers and corners and the spear and all that. So, but I mean, it's really a question mark group in my opinion overall. There's just so many new players. Mike Lockhart, Eddie Vesteren have been making waves in camp. Those are two guys we've heard a lot about. Lockhart is 6'4", 310, 320 pounds, and is a Georgia Tech transfer, played last year as a backup to Dante Stills, one of the best defensive tackles in school history, and has really gotten his body right. So a lot of people think Lockhart could really plug and maybe fulfill that Jordan Jefferson hole, which is going to be really hard to fill. Jordan Jefferson he's going to be a draft pick. He transferred to LSU. Unfortunately, we lost him in NIL situation there as well.
Yeah.
But Sean Martin is just as consistent as it gets at his spot, and certainly is capable of rushing the passer. I mean, he's probably got double-digit career sacks, so it's not like he can't do it. So overall, though, I think it's a position of that it could be overall very solid for us, or it could really be a weakness for us. And then I don't know how they're going to hold up unless Malba really and Lockhart really step up, which Malba's so new, maybe he's still feeling his way out. But we need some space eaters because we need to be able to stop the run.
Yeah, that's the one matchup that I'm probably the most concerned about in this game is your all's offensive line against our defensive line because there are so many unknowns. And I mean, our guys could come out and surprise us and play really well, or they could get pancaked. You know what I mean? They're not going to get pancaked, but they could get pushed off the ball.
Yeah.
So that does concern me a little bit, but we're just got to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State is going to come out and try to run the ball, so that will be interesting because I know they're going to try to kind of set the tone with that and then ease Aller into things. So if they're running the ball, at 5 yards a clip in that game or more, they'll feel pretty good play action, giving them a couple shots downfield then. So that it definitely is. They're going to go with that game plan to run and, against an inexperienced D-line, that's probably what they want to do. So that is probably where Penn State has the biggest advantage, I'd say, on paper right now.
All right, guys. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say Penn State wins this football game. I still feel I just feel that there's just too much talent there. And unfortunately, West Virginia is just not in a place as a program to match up with a team this good. But I do think that there's a chance. We have a puncher's chance to pull an upset here, being that it's week one, inexperienced quarterback, and our offensive line and running back room being what it is. So there are obviously, and there's an avenue, but I think Penn State wins this game by 12 points. That's what I've said, for a week now. I'm going to stick with it.
My prediction, and I hate to do this, but after talking to Alec, man, and going through these position by position breakdowns, I don't know that we win at any spot. I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't know, man. I think they covered the spread 20.5. I hate to say it, but I think Penn State covers.
I'm kind of in between. Obviously, Penn State gets a huge advantage from being at home. I think Urban Meyer said it's as much as 10 to 14-point advantage, and that game obviously intensifies that. So that's a factor. I do have, there are some concerns about Aller first game, big game, national TV, that kind of stuff. But if they can just come out and run the ball, and I do think West Virginia has maybe a slight advantage on the interior of the offensive line versus the interior of Penn State's defensive line, at least for now, because there's a lot of, you got to prove it with that position right now for Penn State. So that's one part where if West Virginia can run the ball and keep it close, take time off the clock, long drives, I think they could cover it that way.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of in a 17 to 21 point win for Penn State. I think it'll be close in the beginning, but I think eventually, talent-wise, it kind of does in the second half of games usually show up and be the difference. So, I mean, I could see halftime a 17-7 game or something like that. But then the second half, it kind of slips away a little more from West Virginia. But I mean, I do think this is a better West Virginia team than the record last year and kind of some of the preseason rankings I've seen. So I will say next year, going to West Virginia with seems like a rather young West Virginia team at some spots, I think that'll be a way better game.
Yeah.
You're talking about Traylon Ray. You're talking about Traylon Ray and Ronnie Gallagher being a year older, probably being number one receivers in their own right, both of them. It just really depends on the Neil Brown situation. If he's fired, what happens? So we could be a dumpster fire or we could be rolling come next year. So it really just depends on what happens this year.
We got Nico at quarterback potentially. If he ends up being the guy. So I mean, we're going to lose a few. We're going to lose a few off that offensive line, which is concerning. But but the good news is, I think we're more prepared to replace those guys now than we would have been. Than we were when Neil first got here.
For sure.
We're going to have backups that are experienced now versus guys that are just getting thrown to the wolves, basically. So,
Alec, man, tell everybody where they can find you, plug your stuff, burn that for sure.
Yeah, Penn State Central stuff, the Twitter, PSU_strong, the podcast, Booze, Bets, and Ball, a Penn State football podcast. You can search that up. It should come up, but the YouTube channel name is Whitaker Media, WHITAKER, and then Media. I do other shows on there. I do some baseball stuff. We rank bars. We do drinks of the week and stuff. So we have all kinds of fun stuff on the channel. So check that out.
Appreciate that. And Couz, tell everybody where they can find you, obviously.
Yeah, I'm over on YouTube at Couz's Corner. It's spelled COUZ''S. You can see it there at the bottom. I'm on Twitter at Couz206. I cover West Virginia football. I cover Big 12, cover conference realignment a lot. I love to talk conference realignment. I'm kind of passionate. I'm kind of a nerd about it. But and then Paul and I have a channel together, man, called Hoops from the Hills, where we cover West Virginia basketball. To my knowledge, it's the only YouTube channel dedicated solely to West Virginia basketball. So we try to keep everybody up to date on West Virginia basketball news over there at Hoops from the Hills. So please subscribe to both of those channels.
Thank you for that. And Alec, dude, you sat here with us for an hour and 9 minutes. You're right up our alley because you're a talker, just like we are. We're long-winded guys. We love to talk our football, and I'm all for a long-winded breakdown as long as it makes sense. I feel like it's necessary if you ask me, right?
Right.
So we're true nerds, guys. It is what it is. It's 6:40. And we're, in the evening and we're sitting there doing this, what we love to do, right? So we appreciate that, man. And we're glad to have met a new friend in you. Hope to have you on again. And, man, if you ever want to invite one of us on, I'm sure we'd be happy to help you and return the favor.
Yeah, I definitely think we're leaning that way. We're a couple weeks away from getting to our game stuff, but definitely would love to break it down more.
Sure.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, hey, we appreciate you for being on. You heard it here, guys. We got a clean sweep for the Nittany Lions. It's not a big surprise. They came in at 7 in the AP preseason poll today, so I think a lot of us can see the way this thing is trending. But we do have Pat McAfee on our side, guys. Kurt Herbstreit may not agree with that, but that's fine. We appreciate you guys for being here, guys. It's been another edition of Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. This episode is over, and we are out.
Keep country roads.
This is for Cameron. Cam.